Welcome. Nice to see everyone here. My usual way of giving one of these workshops, I'm just going to continue in my usual fashion by not really having a plan. I figured that maybe I'll just start by playing a tune. Let me think. Kind of in the mood for confirmation, I think. Let's see if I can remember the head. So I figure maybe I'll just kind of start by sort of giving you a brief background, where I'm from, what I'm doing here. I was actually born in Chicago, but I grew up in South Carolina. We moved there when I was maybe 4 years old. And neither of my folks were musicians, but they had kind of a good record collection. It wasn't like a very large record collection, but just kind of a little bit of everything, you know. And as a kid, I would kind of explore it. I think actually my my mother said something recently, like I was a little bit hyperactive, I guess, as a kid, and the only way to get me to sit still was to play some music. So this would happen often, and I was just kind of interested in it from an early age, checking out what the albums that they had were, the different covers, or whatever. I had no idea what any kind of music was. They had Bach and Nutcracker Suite and some Beethoven symphonies and some more modern music, some Bartók, Stravinsky. They had music by the Beatles and Bob Dylan, Joni Mitchell, Mothers of Invention. They had a couple of records. Some world music. I remember there was a recording of music from Bali that I used to listen to a lot when I was a kid. There's a lot of these old Nonesuch records. I think they were extremely cheap at the time, and they just had all this kind of interesting music. So they had a bunch of those, like Balinese music, Japanese music, Greek music, some African music. When I was maybe 7 or 8, I really made a big discovery of both of their Beatles records, and then also these blues records, like Chicago blues records. I think this was the music that first made me think about becoming a musician. So, I'd always kind of played piano a little bit by ear. I actually always refused to take piano lessons because everyone that I knew that took piano lessons, they all hated playing the piano. So I didn't want this to happen. I just really enjoyed messing around with it. And, I had kind of a stubborn streak that I didn't really want anyone to tell me what to play. so I can actually remember the day that I discovered like thirds, and that you could play thirds, and then that first one, C and E. Wow, that sounds really good. And you go up, oh, it's a little bit sad, but it still sounds good. They kind of seem to go in a pattern. Some of them were happy, some of them were sad. And then I found the fifth eventually, and that was like I thought I had just invented music. I thought, wow, now that people are they're gonna flip out when they hear this. So C is happy, D kind of sad. Same with E. Oh, F, we're happy again. Okay, good. G, happy again. A, sad again. And then I'm still trying to come to terms with that B, with the tritone. I don't know. Maybe someday. But but that was I just kind of always explored music as a kid, exploring it, I think. And I was fortunate enough that I think that my folks saw that I was interested, so they bought me like a little electric organ or whatever, and I used to play this thing. And then when I was 7 or 8, as I was saying, I was into the Beatles and I was into the blues. Like they had this record had Otis Rush and some Buddy Guy on it. I was really into Buddy Guy, So I got an electric guitar also, and I wanted to be either the fifth Beatle or Buddy Guy. And I think it's safe to say I was the only 8-year-old in my class in Columbia, South Carolina, that had these particular aspirations. But and then when I was maybe 9 or 10, I discovered some of their jazz records, And again, it was kind of a limited selection, but it was enough to get me in there. They had, Time Out, Dave Brubeck record, with Paul Desmond. I just had never heard a saxophone sound this way, Like when I was growing up, I think I had just heard the saxophone on pop records, and maybe most of the musicians on the records, maybe they didn't have a great sound, or maybe I just didn't like that style, but I always hated the saxophone. I always thought it was like, why did they have a saxophone solo? There's so many other instruments that could make a nicer solo, I always thought. So when I heard this, I heard Time Out, they had some Charles Lloyd records, they had a couple Miles records with John Coltrane, some Eddie Harris that I still love. And I thought, wow, well, maybe there's more to this than I realized, I should check it out. So when I was 10, I just bugged them until they got me a saxophone, and they said, okay, you can do it, but you're going to have to take lessons, you know. And I said, well, I don't really want to take lessons, but I want to play, so all right. And I was just very fortunate to have some very encouraging people around me at that time, you know, who could see that I was really interested. I mean, the saxophone teacher that I started studying with was a graduate student at the University of South Carolina, Bryson Borgstedt. And I think he saw immediately that I was interested, because I was coming in and I was trying to figure out how to play the melody to Sweet Georgia Brown, you know, and Take Five and all this stuff. And so he kind of showed me, okay, well, this is kind of what this is how jazz improvisation works. You know, this is a form. This is what the chords are. You know, and I was kind of off and running, and I was just kind of obsessed in a way. And so I guess I played. I think I played my first gig. It wasn't a real gig, actually. Well, there was also my music teacher in elementary school would stay after school with me and play the piano, trying to figure out piano parts to Take Five and Sweet Georgia Brown and whatever. And we did this one gig at something like a women's club or something somewhere in Columbia when I was maybe 11 or something. I think that was my first actual gig. But by the time I was, 14, 15, I was playing a fair amount around Columbia. Which I think was a very fortunate thing. I mean, it wasn't like there's Columbia, South Carolina is not exactly the jazz mecca of the world, but there were enough people that were in the scene that, there was at least something going on. And, probably if I had grown up in New York, I wouldn't have had so much performance experience. I was kind of one of the only saxophonists in town. So even though I was a kid and had to have my dad drive me to and from the gigs, I was on the gig. So, that was extremely valuable, and the guys that I was kind of lucky enough to fall in with too. I remember there was a regular gig every Tuesday night at this club, and then another one on Wednesday night. And the Tuesday night was with these guys. They didn't want to hear anything but bebop. That was like anything past whatever 1957. They didn't really want to know about. But they were deep in this thing, like this, trumpet player sounded like Clifford Brown. He kind of had all that stuff together. Not the sound, but he really was a very, very, intelligent improviser. And so I learned a ton of tunes just playing with him, and kind of got into, playing that way, like really learning the jazz tradition from these kind of older musicians. And oftentimes there would be a song I didn't know, and I'd have to decide, well, am I going to play on it anyway? Can I hear the chord changes? And they wouldn't really cut me any slack because I was a kid either. They just kind of, whatever. And then on Wednesday night was kind of the more experimental guys. Like we'd play a standard, and then we'd play free for 20 minutes, and then we'd play maybe a Rolling Stones tune, and then something, it was kind of a mishmash of this and that. So I kind of, it was a good way of getting a few different sides of, how music can be made, following the rules directly, and then, well, maybe you can bend them a little bit. And, and as I said, my earliest listening, I didn't even really know what the difference between genres was. I didn't know where all this music was coming from. I just put the record on, and if I liked the sound, I liked the sound. So, I think I kind of carried that. Fortunately, I think I still try to carry the way of looking at music around with me. That all the kind of divisions between styles. I mean, of course they're important, and that's what gives like a certain local music like its thing. But then hearing the things that are common to all music, and things that make music work and speak to people across any cultural boundary. This is an important thing that music can do, I think. But a lot of what I was really trying to learn to play, because I was involved in the saxophone, trying to learn how to play the saxophone in the jazz tradition. Was really trying to get into bebop, because at first I was really into the guys in Duke Ellington's band, you know, Johnny Hodges and Paul Gonsalves and all this stuff, and I wasn't really into Charlie Parker. Like whenever I heard him, you know, I mean, I had read that he was this amazing genius, and whenever I heard him, I thought, well, I just don't get it. I don't know why is he playing so many notes? Why is he playing with that sound? You know, and then one day I just said, well, you know, everyone says he's so great. I guess I'll check it out again. You know, whatever. And it just hit me. You know, I went, oh, okay, that's what's going on. And then I probably spent, you know, the next year listening to almost nothing but Charlie Parker, trying to figure out how this language was being constructed. And you know, I feel very, very thankful that I had that experience, and at that young of an age that I could internalize it, you know, in that way. And I still feel that, you know, most of what I do, as out as it gets, whether it sounds related to this style of playing or not, it's in some way that's behind it. You know, this knowledge of, you know, Johnny Hodges and Lester Young and Bird, you know, even in situations that don't sound anything like it, this is still like, you know, me learning how to play the saxophone, that's feels like kind of home base, you know, even though it's kind of rare now for me to even play standards, you know. You know, so anyway, that sort of brings me through my teenage years. I graduated from high school in 1989 and decided that I really wanted to come to New York. So I came to the New School, and I was there for 1 year, and then I was at Manhattan School of Music for a couple years after that, and somehow managed to get a degree that I'm not sure if I deserve or not. But also during that time, I started playing with Red Rodney, who's a trumpet player, played with Charlie Parker, and you know, to have kind of the experience of playing with someone with that direct connection to the bebop era was also, you know, I mean, for one thing, for me, just playing Blues for Alice with the guy on the record, you know, I thought, wow, I can't really believe that I'm in this situation. And it was also kind of my first taste of what it really means to be a jazz musician, to go on the road and, you know, just all the things that are involved musically and extra musically, you know. You know, so that was you know, really kind of an important time for me. And then I've just been in New York since, working, you know, playing with a lot of different bands, playing more and more with my own band. You know, I'm like 36 now, so you know, I feel that I was kind of able to catch the tail end of a lot of stuff here in New York, I think, like being able to work with someone like Red. You know, there's not that many people of that, from that generation, still playing, you know. So to have that kind of direct link, you know, I had a chance to play a little bit with like Ray Brown and Sweets Edison and this whole scene that's not around, you know, and the culture keeps changing, and the culture that they came from, that music came from, you can see, you know, it does continue and it develops, you know. So I kind of see what I'm trying to do is, you know, follow the same thing. You know, I feel that you know, it was always obvious to me, you know, having the chance to talk with these older guys, you know, about how much of a scene it really was, you know. 52nd Street, I mean, we all, you know, I mean, how amazing would that be now to think of a whole block of just clubs with whatever, Billie Holiday in one club and Bird in another one, you know. I mean, for me, it just seems like, I can't believe that it happened, but, you know, but that's where the music came out of. It came out of this culture, and I still believe that there's more to be done, you know, and obviously this culture, the one that thrived at that time on 52nd Street, is not there, but there's other stuff going on, and music is, you know, more important than ever to be made, I think. Whatever, I could get on my soapbox later, but I don't know. That's sort of my general take on everything. That's my life in 15 minutes or whatever it was. Wow, didn't take that long. I figure, usually the way these things work best is if I open it up for questions and we get on some subject and see where it goes. I do find that when I'm playing at fast tempos, I'm kind of thinking, I don't know how to explain this, but kind of thinking in halftime or thinking in larger chunks, thinking of maybe the whole 8 bars going by. I'm not always like the most methodical, the way that I work things out isn't always, it's almost never like a real method. It's kind of going for a sound in my head, and I think the way that I begin to approach these things, like these articulation things, is to really just trying to hear a sound in my head. I remember at certain times when I've gotten really frustrated with how I am sounding and feeling like I'm not expressing what I want to express, I've just tried to sing what I want the lines to sound like, and go from there. Because then it's not like I'm going to be able to sing the notes all that well, but at least I can get the flavor of what I'm trying to do, So at kind of an up tempo, I don't know. I guess you're talking about probably something like there. There's some that are really glided over, I think, and some that are more heavily attacked. For me, I don't think I could say, oh, I tongue or I don't tongue. For me, it's really tied up in the phrase, So sometimes it may be all legato, and some other time it might be all really kind of harsh. But there's some that are even really swallowed,
I'm not saying you have to tongue sound mystical,
Yeah. Everyone finds a way to do it. That's just kind of how I approach it. Is really, it comes from the phrase. I think I kind of went through a process where maybe first I was just thinking these very down the middle bebop, and then gradually bringing some other kind of things in there, how tabla players will play groups of sevens, put the triplets in a slightly different spot in the bar, how some of the Cuban musicians, there's all those, kind of over the bar line, all this kind of thing. I started thinking about how I can still be playing confirmation or whatever, but start to use those things. And I think it started first by just singing these rhythms and then trying to figure out what notes could work. How could I figure out the notes? So the sound of it, kind of going progressively from bebop further out, just as an example. You know, you can sort of hear how maybe I'm kind of mixing these traditions up in a way, you know. But then I had to figure out like what notes will make, you know, those phrases work. And that kind of led me, I think, into other harmonic things too, because I realized that, you know, the usual way of outlining chords and stuff that's right out of Charlie Parker wouldn't, you know, just doesn't fit those rhythms. So I had to find some other way to do it. I think that kind of helped me harmonically too. You know, but it kind of came from this rhythmic idea, you know. So maybe to kind of give you an example, I'll just play maybe a chorus as I use progressively more and more of this. The way I think of it is that it's kind of coming from these other cultures, you know. Maybe you hear it a different way, but. I don't know, that was kind of in and out, but yeah, that was a little bit that wasn't the best example. That wasn't quite happy, but yeah, you know, that's kind of a lot of how I arrived at this kind of language. For me, it was from this rhythmic phrasing angle, you know, and clearly, like another influence on this in a slightly different way would have been like 20th century classical music, especially composers like Bartók and Stravinsky, you know, who would use these groupings of notes, maybe groupings of, you know, 7 notes over 4/4 or, you know, some kind of thing, to create all these polyrhythms, all these kind of complicated polyrhythms that, you know, was really new to 20th century music. It wasn't new in African music. It had been used a lot, but it hadn't actually been used in all the kind of odd meters. You know, in African music, it was usually related to some kind of 4 and 6 thing. You know, and as far as I know, this was actually a big influence on Stravinsky. You know, like the Rite of Spring and the kind of rhythmic ideas that he used. I mean, the thing that really first attracted me to the Rite of Spring, that I really got from it, and that really like moved me, was that, to me, I was hearing so much groove in it. You know, there was this kind of strong rhythmic propulsiveness. You know, it'll be some kind of out stuff, and then all of a sudden there's this kind of furious, you know, multi-layered thing. I mean, when I finally looked at the score and and I was trying to figure out what I was hearing, a lot of times you don't even see directly because he has everything divided up among so many instruments, and his his orchestration is so amazing that I think he heard the sound in his head, but it's some of the melodies you don't even see directly because they're all it's all these layers that hook up in a certain particular way, and that was an influence too, over like trying to find some different way to find some feeling of forward motion. Obviously Bird found a tremendous way of this rhythmic. It just feels like it's just got to keep going, the way that he's sometimes he'll hold it back, sometimes he'll anticipate it, but this seemed like a different way of trying to do something else that hadn't been explored quite as much. A lot of what I've worked on, I think, has been really, really helped by a knowledge of the piano. I mean, at certain times in my practicing life, I've practiced a lot more piano than saxophone. And I never really took any kind of instruction on it. It's really, really slow for me to try and read any classical piano pieces or something like that. But as far as getting around and being able to play some lines and definitely being able to outline some harmony, it's been just a huge, huge tool. I can't really overestimate how big that's been, just to understanding like the architecture of music, wow, harmonic devices. I don't even know where to start. There's a whole world of things to be explored and systems. I'm as I'm maybe you're sort of getting the idea. My approach, I don't feel like it's that systematic. I'm kind of going usually from kind of what my ear draws me to, and I've kind of tried to investigate, what some systems are, but I don't really feel like I'm an expert in any one of them. And I've kind of, this is almost it's partly a conscious decision to not really have a system, and it's also just this is my personality, that I don't want that. It just doesn't seem, for me, I kind of prefer to think that I'm going to draw from this and that and paint whatever picture I really want to try and paint, drawing from all these different things. But yeah, as far as, wow. Approaching things harmonically, especially as I tried to take things further out, I think certain ideas were very, very helpful, especially ideas of like voice leading. That's a huge one for me. And a lot of it comes from playing the piano and just having the sound of certain voicings in my ear, and the way that I conceive it, the saxophone. I mean, you have a million textures you can get out of a saxophone, just the sound. There's so many expressive things. I remember meeting Ornette Coleman when I was 18 or something like that, and I didn't know what I was getting into. But the thing that really stuck with me was, him saying that was what drew him to the saxophone, was this vocal quality to it. And there's just a million different inflections you can get, but you can only play one note at a time, as opposed to a piano, or if you're orchestrating for an orchestra, you only get this one line. And I kind of like this. It's kind of, it reminds me of like like this Japanese line drawing idea where it's one stroke, and you only get to do it once. You're improvising, and you have to communicate whatever three-dimensional form you're trying to illustrate in this one. There it is. So you have to be extremely careful about what you emphasize where. What parts of the chord you emphasize in what parts of the bar are gonna, make a huge difference as to what the picture is. If it looks like a duck, or maybe you can't tell if it's a duck or hippopotamus or something, you know. You know, that's really the art of it, is which notes you're going to choose. And to kind of illustrate, I guess, what I'm talking about, I mean, I was kind of doing it a little bit when I was playing solo over confirmation. I was playing a bunch of arpeggios, you know, and that's kind of the simplest version of it, like just kind of running through the chords out of time. But yeah, it would be easier to have a piano. You know, and I'll try and kind of construct some melody both in the top voice and the bottom voice, you know. Definitely worth studying the Bach cello suites also for this kind of thing. It's huge, you know. Yeah, just real slowly, I'll just kind of try and see if I can illustrate You know, it'd be a lot easier if I could just kind of plunk down the chords and then show you kind of how I apply it to the horn. But you know, a lot of what I'm kind of trying to get out now, I mean, is you know, I mean, you see a set of chord changes, and I think we all have a tendency to, like, you know, look at that as some kind of absolute thing. But it's important to remember that that's really like a real shorthand for some actual notes. And depending on what voicing the piano player chooses, what note the bass player is choosing, you know, C minor 7 is this kind of abstraction, but there's a million ways to voice it, and there's a million ways to, you know, a lot of different shades of meaning depending on what everyone in the band is playing. So it's very important, you know, first of all, to be able to try and hear really what's going on. I mean, if the piano player is playing some voicing, you know, that's emphasizing some particular part of the chord, it's very important, if you're trying to make some music together, that you understand what that is, you know, and are able to hear what note he's, like, what note is he putting on top, you know, is there some alteration in the middle that you have to keep in mind, you know. This listening is huge, you know. Listening and being able to recognize voicings is, you know, of course, you know, it's kind of impossible to overstate, I think, if you want to be an improvising jazz musician, how important listening is, you know. Obviously playing is important, but, you know, really listening and reacting to the moment and kind of, I don't know, not to sound Zen, but just kind of listening to what the moment needs, you know, and waiting until you hear it, you know, that's really where it's at, I think. And being able to hear these voicings specifically means that you can react, and you can react by playing something that's directly related, or you can react by playing something that's completely unrelated, but it's important that it's a conscious choice. I think, it's funny how even people who aren't musicians, I think, they can recognize these things, even though it's on a very kind of abstract musical thing. Oh, okay, he played this voicing, and then he chose to play the minor third against that, Well, I think that no matter who you are, you can hear if it's deliberate or if it's kind of someone's just playing what they know and not listening, Even if it's the same note. It's kind of funny how that is, but people can hear intention, So to kind of get back, I keep getting excited. I guess this is how my mind works. It's kind of a circular thing. This idea of voicing and voice leading, is a huge influence on like how I approach harmonic things, because I'm trying to think in terms of, a specific voicing, not in terms of G minor 7. I'm trying to hear a specific sound, like, either maybe it's G, B flat, C, F, A. I can hear this sound very clearly in my head, what this voicing sounds like, Or maybe I see G minor 7 and I think, G, fourths kind of thing, like G, C, F, B flat, D, Or with the 6 on top. To me, this is a much different sound than, if you can imagine them all being played at the same time. Now, they're both G minor, or at least in my way of thinking they are, but they have a different meaning. It means a different thing. So in terms of getting from one chord to another, of course you have to understand what the changes are, but I think the deeper level is to really hear in terms of contrapuntal, voices. And the ultimate is to be able to hear everything that everyone is doing, hear what the bass player is doing, hear just what the piano player is doing. And, no one is able to do this all the time, I think. But you do hear in some of our greatest improvisers that they're reacting in this way because they're really listening and their ears are developed enough that they can do it. Sometimes my practicing involves what I just did when I hadn't really prepared anything. I walked in kind of off the street and took the horn out and started playing confirmation. That's kind of sometimes what practicing is like to me. Oftentimes it involves a process of, I'll get out the horn. It just seems like whenever I get out the horn and I start playing it, I always run across something I can't do. And then I start figuring out how to try and do it. There's different things that I try and isolate at various times, I think. A lot of times I'm working on sound, just sound and articulation. I think I've spent a lot of time on this because, this is the first thing people hear. They just hear the sound of the horn. And it's a lifelong thing. As much as there is to learn about harmony and rhythm and form and all, there's at least as much to learn in just like sound and how to get from one note to the next. Trying to get as deep inside the, really being able to just play a melody. Sometimes I'll just play melodies, really, and again, I'm not sure what I'm trying to do. I don't know if I could explain it in a scientific sense, but I'm looking for a certain sound. Like maybe I'm experimenting with different angles that the neck can go in, maybe to get a deeper thing on certain notes, or, experimenting lately with kind of a double embouchure thing on some notes to get just a slightly different, more open sound, So I might just get out the horn and, really just. experiment with just with as many different timbres as I can get, and not even think about harmony or even melody, just sound, And at other times, I find myself isolating certain other things. It's often a matter of kind of isolating certain things. I mean, some of it you're just trying to get technique, just get around the horn, And the way that I kind of work on that thing, I think, is I have kind of an aversion to working out of books, I think. Some of it's probably good and some of it's probably bad, but the helpful thing about it is that if I, try and learn something and I'm trying to learn it, of course I want to know it in all keys so I can use it wherever, I want to have the maximum amount of freedom. If I'm not reading it, then I have to understand it as a series of intervals. I have to be able to conceptualize it just as, okay, minor third, major second, blah, 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 to be able to get around the horn. And it doesn't matter what it is, I'll come up with just some idea, some phrase, I guess, a pattern, and then see if I can work it around the keys, and also see if I can see how I can jump, so that I'm not just practicing going up and down chromatically, but also going up and down in major seconds, going up and down in minor thirds, with each interval being able to go up and down so that I can do this thing in whatever order and whatever, and then, hopefully maybe even backwards, get into how, if I can play it backwards, so, I mean, it doesn't really matter what the idea is. Say it's just, it's, C, F, G, E, going down. And then major, minor thirds. Perfect fourth. Tritone. That's going up. You do it going down. If I'm at my most methodical, that's hopefully what I would do. And there's no end to these phrases. Even just like a 4-note thing, every day I pick up the horn, I can find something like that, And the hard part, you have to be able to get around the horn, but really the more interesting part to me is that I have to get my mind to translate from, okay, it's these intervals, down a perfect fifth, up a major second, down a minor third. That's what the construction is. And then get through all the layers so that my thought can come through this big piece of metal with all this stuff on it, that I can, first of all, say, okay, C, F, G, E, okay, up a minor third, E flat, A flat, B flat, G, and then be comfortable enough on the horn to execute that, So there's like a few different levels whenever you're trying to do this thing. And for me, if I'm reading it, I don't have to internalize it in such a deep way. So it's not as interesting to me. It's not as much interesting brain work, and I think I also don't learn quite as deeply. If there's something that I'm not able to understand, if there's like some piece, studying a score or something like that, and I just don't hear what's going on, and I don't feel like I'm able to transcribe it, then I'll take the shortcut and, wow, what are those notes? Okay, that's what they are. But in general, I don't really enjoy working out of books too much. Like I actually never bought the Omni book. I never had that, and I'm not really sure that I ever learned anyone's solo all the way through. I would kind of pick the bits and pieces that I liked, and that were difficult that I couldn't hear. And there's of course as many solos that you could put on and I could sing every note back, but as far as writing everything down, I know I never did that except for in school, and as far as playing the whole thing, I don't think I really did that either, you know. And I think it's a good thing to do. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying that for me, I think I tried to pick the things that were the most mysterious and figure those out, and then go from there, you know. So that's some of what I practice. I mean, again, and then a lot of it, maybe trying to isolate other things. Like, there's always something where I'm trying to make myself uncomfortable in a certain way so that I can't just play what I already know. Like, I'll take a tune like Confirmation. I mean, much of these things, you know, often when I'm practicing, I want to be improvising when I'm practicing, because that's what I want to get better at, is improvising and being able to see all the choices. You know, so I might take a song like Confirmation and say, okay, I'm going to see if I can play the whole thing just using triplets, you know. You know, or just in one range of the horn. Like, this is how I've tried to work on the altissimo too. It's just like, you know, I mean, it gets rough up there, but you know, just seeing if I can actually improvise up there and make some kind of melodies, you know. As much as I can, trying to, yeah, or down low, you know. I mean, things that people don't use as much, you know, trying to play a whole chorus, just. Et cetera, like exploit different things that the horn can do, or just, you know, see how long I can use a motive too. That's another thing. You know, how long can I go over a tune, or not over a tune, just freely. But you know, if it's over a tune, then you're also putting another layer of difficulty on it, in a way. You know, although you're also putting another layer of structure, so your choices are more limited, and that can be easier in a way. You know. But say, you know, say I'm just going to use that as a motive and play over Confirmation. You know, I was kind of trying to use that idea, and again, that was a simple enough idea that almost anything you could you could say, oh, it was related in this way, but even if it wasn't. But you know, this is a thing that I've worked on too, like freely too, just trying to take some kind of idea and see how much I can work with it. You know, because of course, if everything you do is like a direct thing from that, it's going to get pretty boring pretty quickly. But if you can find enough variation, like that right thing in between just imitation all the time and then development, you know, some sort of continuity and some kind of contrast, then you can really create a lot of interest, you know, because the listener can hear that there's some thread, that there's some logical thing that's going through it, you know, and that sometimes you're choosing to go with it, sometimes you're choosing to go against it, but as long as you keep it going, you know, that can really draw the listener in. Something that was really kind of eye-opening for me in that regard was studying the scores to the Bartók string quartets, particularly like the fourth and fifth quartet. I remember, you know, because I'd listened to this music and, you know, just kind of baffled both at the obvious level of organization and care taken, and then the, you know, seeming just complete freedom of tonality and rhythm. You know, like how is he getting those effects? I mean, it just seems so like it's such a huge language. How is, you know, but it's clearly ordered. I didn't really understand how it was working, you know. So really studying these scores, what really got me was how little material there was. I was shocked at how much he was getting out of very little. You know, you could break up a whole movement into maybe a 5-note motif and see very clearly that, you know, okay, well, he's got it going, you know, this is the direct statement of it, and then, you know, the viola is playing the same thing, but, you know, in a different key, backwards and slower, while the cello down there is playing it, you know, really fast in some other rhythm, you know, but everything was so related, and a lot of how he got these incredible harmonies too seemed, I was realizing, you know, was just from the intersection of these lines coming together, you know, and I mean, it was clearly not random. He was clearly able to organize it so he knew what he was going to get. It's not like, you know, a kind of collision of random lines, but you know, that was what was so amazing about it was just, you know, just how tightly organized it was, and yet what a feeling of freedom I got when I listened to it. You know, it just seemed like a whole exploding world, you know. So you know, so that kind of helped lead me down the road to trying to figure out how to do that myself, you know, and think about, okay, if I have a motive, you know, whatever, you know, what can I do with it? Obviously, play it lower, you know, higher, you know, play it in different keys, you know, but then backwards. You know, down an octave and backwards. In a different key and backwards, you know. You know, and various millions of permutations that can be derived from that, you know, changing the order of the notes. You know, a million ways to do it, and you know, so there's a whole big world of things you can do with this, and I remember somebody saying, I don't remember who it was. They were saying, you know, in pretty much every jazz improvisation, there's about enough material for about 10 symphonies. You know, the way that each of us play, there's enough musical material in there that you could easily write, you know, hours of music if you just use that material as a thematic thing, you know. So in a certain way, I think, you know, I'm not saying we're working too hard, but maybe sometimes we are. Like, you know, the amount of things that you need to generate, maybe I find sometimes that you know, the problem isn't that I'm you know, not generating enough material. It's that I'm not working with the material that I have in intelligent enough a way that you know, I can do something with it. You know, and there's, you know, there's something I like about this way of thinking too, is that it takes it into a zone where, you know, what you're really talking about, as I sort of mentioned earlier, is that you're creating areas of you know, sort of a continuity and then an area of contrast, you know, And then you can kind of think of it, again, like I can relate it to visual art. You know, you can look at it like, okay, well, you know, like, you know, you're creating some background pattern, some pattern in the background. You know, imagine like a Matisse painting with this wallpaper or something. You know, you're creating this here, and then you're breaking it up with this one other thing here. Maybe you're choosing a little splash of something, you know, in the high register over here that is completely unexpected, you know. Well, the reason it's unexpected is because you've created something for it to be unexpected against. You know, if you don't create this coherent thing, then you don't even have the possibility of going against it. You know, so this is how I like to think of it, is kind of like trying to paint a painting. What's the picture you want to paint? And of course, you know, the more understanding you have of your materials, the more interesting picture you're going to be able to paint. You know, and the more different stylistic things that you know about, the more you can do with it. You know, I mean, it still is like, at the end of the day, you can have all the tools in the world and not know what to paint. that's you know, that's the impossible part to break down into smaller parts. I think is just, you know, at the end of the day, it's up to each of our individual vision of what we want to say at whatever level of complexity. You know, I mean, these sort of concepts that I'm discussing of, you know, Bartok, all this kind of stuff. Lester Young didn't need it to paint unbelievably great paintings, you know, because the real point is, you know, like at whatever level of technical complexity, that's just kind of, you know, that enables you to be able to paint a more complex picture, but it doesn't necessarily mean a better picture. You know, sometimes a great simple thing is exactly what's needed, and a little knowledge can be confusing, you know, if it's not digested. And that's all of our jobs. I mean, we're all trying to learn, you know, so, you know, we're all trying to put ourselves in a position where we are a little confused and not sure where to go, and that's a healthy thing too. I think that's a healthy state to be in. But sometimes the right thing is the simplest point from A to B. You know, I mean, I sometimes feel like, man, I wish that all this complexity had never been developed. Then I could just, you know, it would be easier to find something that felt like my own, that, you know, was very simple. It seems like, you know, all of the great simple things, sometimes it seems like they've all been discovered, you know. But, you know, each of us has our own personality, so I guess whether it's original or not, maybe that's not even as important as it, if it's just expresses who we are as an individual. Maybe that's actually more valuable in the long run than any kind of progress. You know. A lot of what I've discovered about writing, and writing has, especially in the past few years, I think, been one of my best ways to practice also. I feel like, you know, the things I've been writing a little more for larger ensembles. I feel like doing this has helped my improvising a lot, just because I'm thinking about how to organize everything, and I have enough time to, you know, go back and change my decision, you know, but at least I'm thinking in that way. Yeah, the hardest thing is that blank piece of paper, I guess, you know. And you have some idea. I mean, there's some tunes that I've written that really just feel like they just kind of drop from the sky, you know. And it's just, thanks, you know. But those are kind of few and far between. And I think those don't fall from the sky unless you know, keep the roof open, if you know what I mean. A lot of it is just writing something, I think. Just write something, you know. And the worst thing that can happen is that it won't be good, and you don't have to let anyone hear it. I mean, in general, this is important to remember about music, as we all get hung up in our things, is that, you know, it's not heart surgery. I mean, no one is going to die. Maybe it's a bad solo, but how bad is that? It's nothing. That's an interesting question. I mean, there's a certain point that you feel like you can let it out to the outside world, and then there's a point where you feel like it's not ready, like it's still in the womb, and yeah, you have to just let it sit. I mean, there's some ideas for tunes that I have had for years that I haven't quite figured out how to use yet, or just haven't gotten around to. But there are also situations where, I mean, it seems to happen to me often where when I bring the tune in for the band to play it the first time, then it becomes obvious what it needs, if it's already there or what it needs, and there's no other way to find that out. Especially if you're dealing, because usually I'm trying to write for a very specific group. I know what group I'm writing for. It's not just a tune. So I'm thinking about their personalities, but sometimes as soon as I hear everyone play it, I realize, oh yeah, it needs another section to offset this, or it doesn't need this section, or something. I think feedback can be very useful, but I think there is a time that you have to keep it to yourself and let it grow to where it's going to be. I mean, it depends on the situation. If you're writing a piece as an exercise or something, then maybe it's a different story. And some of the pieces that I've used, I've conceived of first as like, oh, let me see if I can write something in 3-bar phrases or something like that. Then maybe it doesn't feel as close to you. But yeah, I don't know. I generally like to keep things to myself until I feel like they're done. But I'm very willing, once I bring it in, I mean, sometimes it'll go through many revisions from the time that I bring it in to how it actually gets played. And a lot of times things go through a lot of revisions before I bring it in even the first time. I mean, it's amazing, you might not recognize at all what I started with. I might have started with some idea and it's a slow ballad in 3. And by the time I bring it in, it's a calypso in 11 or something. But there's some way that it got there, like in an orderly way for me anyway, that I realized, oh, that doesn't really work, or that's kind of trite, or maybe this is too complex. It doesn't need to be so complex. I should simplify it, or it doesn't need, I mean, there's just a lot of different processes that it goes through, and I feel like this is a big learning tool for me, is going through all this editing of my compositions, and especially lately since I've written a little bit more for larger ensembles, really like what works, what voicings sing, and what ones could be improved. Boy, there's a lot you can learn from setting up your own things. You're setting up a million opportunities to fail, but at least if you're in your living room, you can second guess a lot of them if you can see them, and then sometimes you don't see it and you bring it in and you go, oh God, that's But this is one of the most important skills to have as a musician, I think, is this self-diagnosis. I mean, I've spent a lot of time listening to myself and agonizing over the decisions that I made. I mean, just going, oh man, it could have been great. Why didn't I do this? I mean, but it's useful. I mean, and it can be like a negative thing if you get into that circle of I suck. This is not helpful, clearly. But if you're able to step back and say, that would have been better if I had gone this way, then maybe you learn something, and the next way you'll go that way. But a very good teacher can help you with this, or someone that even not a teacher, but even someone who's not a musician, they can help you with this. But in the end, you're the only one that can decide if it's what you wanted to say or not. So I think people's advice is worth listening to. It's important to be open, and it's important to, at the end of the day, even if no one else likes it, if it's what you want to say, that's what you got to say. Where it's going, but you just got to have to follow this process. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, that gets into the whole how musicians deal with critics, and that's a whole other thing, you know, and a point of, you know, knowing how to be psychologically mature enough that you can take everything with a grain of salt. Good and bad. If they love it, you know, okay, I'm glad, you know. And if they didn't, it's like, well, maybe they had a point about something, or maybe they're completely wrong, but whatever, you know. It's all, you know, it just has to boil down to you. And you know, not saying that the artist is this infallible, amazing being that has powers that ordinary people don't have. I'm just saying that, like, it kind of has to boil down to your own taste, because it's you, you know. I mean, there's no one else that's going to be able to do it, you know, good or bad. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I would hate not to give credit somewhere if some credit is due. I mean, of course, musicians are always talking among themselves about various things about how to play music. I feel like my way of practicing has kind of just evolved in an organic way from me being alone in a room and with my horn, you know, not necessarily, and you know, thinking about the lessons of the past, but maybe not specifically. I can't think of any one person that, you know, said, "Oh, I don't use books," so then I stopped using. I mean, I think I was like that from my very first saxophone lessons. He would always give me some assignment, and I'd never do it, and I'd come in with something else that I was working on, you know. I think there are a million ways to get there. I mean, this sort of gets into the area of, like, how do you find your own voice, whatever this is. And that's kind of a complicated thing. I mean, for me, I think when I started out, you know, maybe this was fortunate that I was so young and I wasn't thinking about it this way at all. You know, my first thought was, well, no, there was definitely a need for self-expression. That was definitely in there. But there was also me listening to Charlie Parker and going, that's cool, I want to do that, you know, just copying, just completely copying, you know, or trying to, and sometimes at home I try and do this, you know, like, I mean, if I really admire, you know, I mean, I've tried to copy, you know, okay, Sonny's phrasing, and then I'll try and copy, you know, Lester Young's phrasing, or Dexter's phrasing, or so, you know, some, you know, it's just directly trying to copy. There's not even a pretense of trying to do something yourself. I mean, I think your own voice, you do have to make a decision, I think, to have your own voice, but it also just kind of comes, if you try and force it, I guess what I'm saying, then you're not going to, it's not going to be a real deep, it's not going to be coming from a real deep place. You have to just kind of let it happen, I think, because, you know, we're all, just everything about us physically, the way, you know, the way you look, your shape, how big you are, you know, I mean, you're going to get everyone is going to get a different sound out of the saxophone, and everyone, you know, you hear how they speak, you see how they walk, everyone feels rhythm in a different way, slightly different way, you know, and you kind of have to just go with it, I think, and not think that you should be doing something else. I think it's almost a matter of getting all the other stuff out of the way. And there's a lot of copying that has to happen, I think, before you get to this point where, you know, you reach a level of proficiency where you know, you can do this, but then eventually you just have to let it go and go, well, I don't know if it's good or not. I have no idea if anyone is going to like it, or if I'm going to like it, or whatever, but this is kind of what feels, for me, like the most natural way, and that's how you have to get there, you know. And the only common thing that I can see from all the great musicians that I've had a chance to work with, you know, in very different kind of areas with very different approaches, some extremely methodical, some completely anti-methodical, you know, avant-garde, you know, swing, whatever stylistic thing. It seems like the the only thing that you can say that's a constant with all these people is that they have a sound in their head of what they kind of want to do, and they figure out a way to get it through their instrument, whatever way it takes, you know. And that's, you know, it's kind of as simple as that, you know. And I think everybody admires someone who does this, you know. Everyone can kind of hear it, even if whatever kind of music it is, if they're open to it, you know. I don't know, you can like Mick Jagger or not, you know, whatever. But he's got his thing, you know. He does that thing, and he's, you know, not fighting it, obviously. At this point, he'd be how big a fool would he be? You know, so that's kind of where it's at, and also just being open. I mean, this is another thing that I find about all the people that I really respect how they make music and how they look at things is they're open. You know, I mean, to me, I might think, wow, they're at a, you know, such a level. You know, they don't need to add anything more to their musical experience. But, you know, I mean, I'm like, you know, sitting out there like looking at Lee. You know, the fact that, you know, anyone is here like checking stuff out. This is how they got there in the first place. Is because they were curious and they wanted to learn. You know, so. You know, that's what I want to do, you know. And if I'm a traditionalist in any way, that's kind of what it is I want to try and follow this same process that seemed to get my heroes to be able to play something beautiful. So, you know, yeah. A lot of it, as I say, first came from learning to play bebop and learning how that works and learning how to choose what note of the chord on what beat to get that feeling, you know. And also, I mean, you know, this is often a kind of weakness, I think, of many saxophonists, is that they don't think about the rhythm nearly as much as they're thinking about. I mean, maybe this is kind of a consequence of there being so many books available, so much educational material. I mean, the things that are easiest to talk about, the things that's really the easiest to talk about is kind of harmony. You know, you can analyze harmony and stuff, but you can't really. There's no way to get that out of a book. You can show different rhythms, but really, you know, to get the phrasing to where it sounds like you're hearing it, there's no book that can ever show you that. You just have to copy things. So yeah, I mean, it comes from thinking about being able to play in time, just being able to play in time and delineate a form, you know, even at a real simple level. I mean, it seems like the theme of the day is confirmation. You know, play a bass line. Can you really play a bass line and like outline the harmony, you know? You know, can you play really, really simply on it? Just melodies, and not even really, not trying to do any, you know, nothing fancy, but can you just make a melody on it and make it feel good? I mean, you know, especially with like a blues, this is kind of a useful thing. It's just, man, you know, it doesn't take much. It just has to feel right. You know, just a few notes. You know, say like just over a B flat blues. You know, just a pentatonic scale, not really hard. You know, this is like Lester Young land, like able to just be incredibly creative within this kind of small, you know, compared to what most people that are going to graduate from a music school know. You know, he never knew as much harmony as probably the entire graduating class of Manhattan School of Music. But, you know, how much music was he able to make? I mean, really, you know, amazing. So, starting simple, you know, and then going from there, like say over confirmation, just simple melodies, you know. If you can hear these simple melodies, then things that are complex are just, you know, a bunch of simple things put together, you know, just maybe a little faster and stuff. But that's kind of, maybe that's the backbone. You know, maybe like, you know, maybe that's the basic thing. But maybe if I want more complexity, I'll play around all that and stuff and go. You know, I'm thinking these target notes, okay, you know, but then I'm adding some other stuff. So I don't know, that maybe that begins to get it at what you're asking. And also just practicing. I mean, I remember practicing a ton with the metronome. I mean, you know, different people say 1 and 3, all the 4 beats. For me, it was 2 and 4. I don't know that it makes a difference, but for me, I'm feeling this hi-hat thing. Usually, that's, again, I'm not saying it's the only right way, but for me, that's, you know. You know, and trying to find a way that I can show what the changes are without needing a rhythm section too. You know. You know, that's if you understand all of everything that's going on, like I'm saying too, like the more you know about any subject, of course, the more interesting conversation you can have about it. So, if as a saxophone player, if you really have a handle on the, you know, on the form, on the rhythm, you know, of course on the harmony and melody is what we're doing. You know, then you can have a much more interesting conversation with everyone else. And the same goes for drummers and for bass players. You know, if you're playing and you need to react to what else is going on from the drums, from the, you know, just the more everybody knows about music, the more interesting conversation you can have. So. I don't know. Yeah, being able to play kind of strongly by yourself is an important thing to do. It's interesting because I think his background, as opposed to mine, is really more from like a rock way of thinking, you know. But there's something about the way that I think he just naturally feels the time and his articulation that did seem just very familiar to me. Like I think he came at it from a different angle, but then I thought, wow, that sounds like something I would want to do on the guitar, you know, and wouldn't physically be able to. But it sounded like, oh yeah, okay, there's some common ground here that you wouldn't expect. So I thought that was a good thing. Yeah. 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 Boy, that's a real big one, and it does involve like copying all these guys, and I don't think I can do a very convincing imitation of any of them at this point, but you know, sometimes maybe I want a real rough thing, you know. rough, you know, and then other times maybe I, you know, like there I wasn't really tonguing at all. That was just, you know, it was just kind of, you know. So I think I do use these different articulations just to, you know, it's another way of providing some contrast in the music. And and as far as how I practiced it, I think I practiced it by doing that and seeing what sounded right, you know. I mean, again, that's a little bit difficult to do without a rhythm section to play against if you're just feeling that it's behind, you know. But yeah, I mean that, you know, that first example I would think of is a little more on top, and that second one would be a little more behind. But yeah, I mean, there's a million little spaces in between the notes, you know. I mean, where you choose to put any note, boy, there's a, yeah. I mean, it's tiny increments of time, but it makes a difference as to what is said, what the meaning is, I think, you know. So, you know, yeah. I mean, I don't know if I can just give an example on my own, but, you know, just a phrase played really roughly and on top. You know, where is it? You know, there's also a volume change in there too, but, you know, to me, those say two different things, you know, even with the same notes, you know. And again, this is what's great about the saxophone, the wind instrument, you know, is how many shades you can get, even though we're limited to one note, I think. Gear, oh, do I have a bunch of horns and stuff like that? I've got a few. I mean, as far as tenors, I have an old Con that I love the sound of. I mean, it's just this huge wall of tenor. I haven't really been able to get it to where it feels comfortable or where I feel like I can make, I mean, for one thing, just getting around on it, but also something about the sound. Like this is a little more contained and feels closer to what I am actually looking for, even if it's not quite as big, you know. And as far as mouthpieces, I mean, I have a few mouthpieces. I try and not obsess. I mean, for the past few years, I've been playing like an old Auto-Link, metal link. Just a few weeks ago, actually, I made a switch. I don't know. I was just kind of getting frustrated with something. This is a Hollywood Dukoff, an old Dukoff, and it just has kind of a different. Maybe it's a little darker. Something about this particular one seems to really sing well, and I don't know. I mean, I try and. I mean, there was obviously a difference, or I wouldn't have made a change. But basically, I have an idea of what I want to sound like, so I'll be able to get something like that no matter what I'm using. But each thing does lead you into different areas. I mean, I think maybe it's more important as you're first kind of discovering what you want your sound to kind of be like, you know, because the equipment obviously dictates something about the sound. I mean, you know, the fact that it's a saxophone itself is, you know, there are just certain things about the instrument. I mean, this is something I love about it. For one thing, just that it's a craft of playing this acoustic instrument, you know, and it's this particular instrument. I mean, they all are, but they're all, you know, it's like a product of a million accidents, really, you know, and its particular beauty and its particular problems, challenges, you know, arise from a million kind of historical accidents, you know. So I try and keep that in mind, and then try and have like a vision of what I would ideally like the saxophone to sound like, and then, of course, that gets translated differently into real life. And sometimes I like that. Sometimes I prefer what real life gives it, as opposed to what this pristine version of it is in my head. You know, like, you know how sometimes the mistakes are the best part, you know. It's that kind of thing. Like, you have an idea what you want to play. Maybe sometimes if it doesn't come out, it's better than what you thought. But yeah, I mean, I feel like I've kind of experimented enough to know what a lot of the parameters are, but I don't know what opening this is or whatever. Yeah, yeah. I try not to make it a focus. I've been playing the bass clarinet a fair amount lately. I mean, I played clarinet when I was in high school. I started on the alto, and that was actually kind of a big change for me. Was I guess kind of after moving to New York, like I was really playing tenor, alto, and soprano a lot when I first moved to town, and I think I was probably a better alto player. Like I just knew the instrument more and how it responded, just because I'd started on it, you know. But I just didn't feel like for some reason, maybe because I started on it and because I was so enthralled to Bird or whatever, you know, I felt like I just couldn't find my own thing on it as much. Somehow the tenor felt like more of my voice, even though I wasn't as good at it. I think maybe that's even what attracted me to it, is that I had to kind of start from scratch again and figure out how to play the tenor, you know, which when I figure it out, I'll let you know.
You're off to a good start.
Every day, climb that hill. Yeah, you know, so I mean, I play a little bit of flute, alto flute, but really not very well, because I've never really gotten just the muscular thing even, you know. I still, after about 15 minutes, I get, you know, as much that as note. But there's something about the sound of the bass clarinet that I really, really find compelling. So I'm trying to explore that a little bit. It feels like I will never be able to come anywhere close to the technical proficiency that I have on the saxophone as on the bass clarinet. And in a certain way, I like that too. I like that I'm a little more limited. So in a certain way, I have to be more careful about my note. You know, I can't figure out a way to get out of every situation. You know, on this, maybe I know so much that I can find some escape route. But on that, it's, you know, there's nowhere to go except squeak. No mysterious thing, just long tones. Just sit there and, you know, for a few minutes, and then on each partial, you know. You know, really just, you know, my neighbors love it when I do that. You know, but that's just after I've done that for 10, 15 minutes, boy, the horn just feels like it's about a third smaller. You know, like it's just like, oh, this is nothing. You just feel this connection with the air column that you don't feel another way. You know, and it's something I kind of enjoy. I mean, I don't start every practice time this way. I mean, actually, lately I just haven't had any time to practice, is what it feels like. It's just, you know, I mean, but I am playing every night, so at least that's a different kind of practicing. You don't get as much new things in your vocabulary, but you do, I think, learn how to use what you know. And that's almost, you know, that can be more useful at some points. But yeah, I mean, that as a way to start. I kind of enjoy doing that sometimes because it's kind of this focusing thing, you know, because a lot of times when you start to practice, you feel like, oh, but I got to call this guy, and I should really answer these emails, and boy, my taxes, boy, you know, like you're just kind of scattered all over the place. So doing that, then after a while, I can kind of just, you know, it's almost like, you know, you get into this certain zone from that, and then I can kind of have a more relaxed practice thing. But that's huge as far as just being able to play up there. And then I've just found fingerings, and as I said, just forcing myself to try and play up there. You know, just seeing if I can play scales up, you know. You know, I mean, it's awkward, but it can be done. You know, sometimes smoother than that. You know, and triads. And you know, just doing that a lot, and trying to improvise up there, you know. And then there's other sounds that, you know, if I'm looking for some real intensity, you know, then you go up there and get the, you know, practice the screaming thing if that's what you want or not, or you know, I mean, it gets pretty much impossible when you get to a certain level of intensity. You just can't move around as fast, you know. But then there's that big cathartic, you know. You know, you know. Maybe that's what you want. At sometimes, but I also like to be able to play quiet up there, and just think of it as an extension of the normal part of the horn, because it's also frustrating that, you know, piano's got all these octaves, you know, but it's not really that huge a range, you know, and sometimes maybe I'm really hearing that a line wants to go up there. You know, just use it, kind of incorporate it into the range of the horn. That's oftentimes how I like to use it.